Bishop, I thank you for the opportunity for us to bring the stewardship reports before the annual conference today in this virtual setting. Delegates will find online the materials for these reports at the annual conference. Quick link to the stewardship and budget resolutions and recommendations. We will start with the CFA report from Phil Potter and Darrell Williams. Carrie James will bring before us the report from the Board of Pensions. Kim Ayers will follow Carrie with the Equitable Compensation Report. And we will close out the stewardship reports with the closed church resolutions that will be introduced by 4 of our district superintendents. I thank each delegate for the pre-work you have invested in preparing yourselves to hear the reports that we bring to you today. I believe these reports are a testimony by each of our stewardship committees who have continued to offer good support to the conference amidst the turmoil of the pandemic. But I also know that the work of the conference committees is simply a reflection of the tremendous amount of work performed by BWC local churches during this time to keep and maintain vibrant and essential ministries within our communities. I am personally blessed by hearing of how the Holy Spirit has challenged our local churches to do more during this season. Our conference staff is honored to serve alongside the efforts of the local churches and the conference committees at this time. We now bring before you the stewardship reports for this year's virtual conference. Thank you.
Hello, I am Phil Potter, the President of the Council on Finance and Administration. I thank you for this time to review the 2021 budget proposal with you. I'm also joined today by Reverend Darrell Williams, who serves as the Council's Vice President. I believe we have an interesting agenda for you today. We will first review the various COVID-19 activities undertaken by the conference and local churches to weather the financial and ministry challenges caused by the pandemic. We also have an update on the 2020 mid-year financial performance results that will lead us into a discussion about both the process and the proposal we are bringing before you for the 2021 conference budget. The last item in the agenda will place the CFA recommendations before you for your vote. I will now turn over the presentation to Darrell for his review of the first 2 items.
Thank you, Phil. As you stated, I'll be reviewing how the conference and local churches have been weathering the financial and ministry challenges caused by the pandemic. I also have some details about the 2020 mid-year financial results for the conference. Our first slide reminds us of the actions by both local churches and the conference to address the financial concerns. The actions that were taken to assist local churches are shown with a single hashtag. Local church assistance was provided in March when the Board of Pensions announced the 3-month waiver of benefit payments that was completed by small church grants for local churches with no benefit obligations. The trustees also offered 3-month deferrals for churches that had conference loans. These immediate relief items for local churches were also supplemented by initiatives to set aside $615,000 from the 2020 budget to support emergency grants for any church that found themselves unable to pay a pastor's salary during this crisis. Several resources were also made available to local churches to assist them with setting up online giving and streaming online services. Local church assistance was also provided in April's focus to pursue alternate funding streams. Many churches benefited from the receipt of PPP funds from the Paycheck Protection Program that were offered by the Small Business Administration. For many churches, the 2.5 months of payroll support became an important funding stream as they faced the uncertainty of no longer worshiping in person and closing their buildings to preschools and other tenants. Actions taken by the council to manage the conference budget are shown with a double hashtag. In March, the CFA approved an 8% budget reduction that reduced the authorized expenses by $1.1 million. The conference was successful in their application for PPP funding, and 2.5 months for the conference came to $1.2 million, very close to the reduced expenses identified in March. As the CFA continued to watch the 2020 performance, the expense reductions were increased to include the unused portion of the $615,000 relief grants. This action increased the 2020 expense reductions to $1.6 million, or 11.7% of the total budget. Overall, the actions during these first 5 months of the pandemic have increased the relief for local churches by more than $3 million, and the conference budget has been reduced by more than $1.6 million. We had a very strong response to our COVID-19 surveys that were collected in early July based on the mid-year financial data. The survey was sponsored by both the CFA and the Cabinet, and it gave us very good insights to the financial challenges faced by churches during the pandemic. On average, the BWC Church reported a decline in tithes and offering of 4.5%. They also reported that expenses were reduced by 5.4% on average. These two measures provide us with some reassurance that churches were generally able to offset slightly lower tithes and offerings with reductions in their ministry budgets. However, in the top graph on the right, we see the breakdown of the survey data. It shows that 35%, or roughly 1/3 of our churches, had a decline in tithes and offerings in excess of 10% compared to last year. What is also somewhat surprising about the survey data is the fact that 41% of our churches reported higher levels of tithes and offerings compared to last year. 10% even reported greater than 20% increases during the pandemic. Beyond the simple tithes and offerings, the survey asked churches the impact to their total income during the first half of this year. These numbers included any alternative funding like the PPP funding. 58% of BWC churches applied for PPP funds, and of those churches, 89% were successful in receiving funding equivalent to 2.5 months of their eligible payroll cost. These alternative sources of funding contributed to increase the total income of churches by 1.3% compared to last year. Overall, the 4.5% decline in tithes and offerings within the conference was more than offset by the receipt of PPP funds by local churches. In fact, 56% of churches reported their total income during the pandemic is now higher than last year. We are thankful that many churches are reporting that they are finding a way to meet their COVID financial challenges. At the same time, it is important for us to realize that 15% of BWC churches are struggling with total income declines of greater than 20%. The COVID-19 survey also assessed the amount of work accomplished by local churches to change their ministries to adapt to the pandemic. 30% of churches added online giving. 72% of churches now have online giving. 40% of churches reduced paid hours or number of staffs during the COVID crisis. 81% of churches added online services during COVID, and 47% of churches increased their community relief efforts during COVID. The significant work accomplished by pastors and their leadership teams during these early months in 2020 are rather amazing when assembled together in one place. The Holy Spirit filled our leaders at this time, and it became a period of great expansion in the church's ability to reach our communities in ministry and outreach. We closed the COVID survey by asking churches when they plan to return to some form of in-person worship. 26% responded that they plan to offer some form of in-person worship as early as July. It was interesting to see the planned actions by local churches appeared to match well the different levels of risk experienced by our various regions during the pandemic. It also is quite telling that nearly half of BWC churches reported they were still uncertain on when they would return to in-person worship. On behalf of the CFA and the Cabinet, I certainly thank each church for their participation in the COVID-19 survey. The results help provide a testimony for the work of the church during a very difficult time. It also helps us prepare for the coming days as the pandemic continues. I will close out this section of the presentation with a quick review of the conference budget performance for the first 6 months of this year. The graph on the slide shows the actual mission shares as the blue bars compared to the 3-year average trends in red and the 2020 budget in yellow. February was pretty much on budget, but when churches stopped having in-person worship in March, the mission shares fell to 21% less than budget, to be followed by an even deeper decline of 31% less than budget in April. We believe a corner was turned in May as some churches started to receive their PPP funds, and in June, the mission shares for the month returned to normal. We really celebrate the commitment of the BWC churches that enabled the June recovery to occur so quickly, and we now track the second half to see if the improvements can continue through year's end. The 3 months of significant shortfalls between March and May resulted in a hole in the conference budget that was $1 million less than budget. The 16% shortfall at the conference level is greater than the 4.5% shortfall in tithes and offerings reported by churches in the COVID survey. So, we are optimistic that the good collection of mission shares in June might continue in the second half of the year. When we asked churches to forecast their mission share giving through year's end, the aggregated total showed a collection rate of 80%. The graph on this slide shows the collection rate forecast is down for every district. An 80% collection rate forecast a $1.6 million shortfall at year end compared to the 91% collection rate budget. This data supports the conclusion that the second half will not repeat the $1 million shortfall recorded in the first 6 months. We are also greatly encouraged that 65% of churches in the survey responded with their intent to give mission shares at 100%. This is down only slightly from the standard trends that record 80 to 82% BWC churches giving shares at 100% each year. We believe this forecast is strong, considering the high level of uncertainty involved with providing a year-end forecast in early July during a pandemic. The forecast helped the CFA to verify that the spending plan that reduces expenses by $1.6 million should be sufficient to cover the anticipated collection rate. The forecast also enables the CFA to review the PPP funding of $1.2 million received by the conference as a resource to mitigate any second-half financial risk, and it has the potential to enable refunding some of the expense reductions in the fourth quarter. I will now turn the presentation back to Phil, who will review the 2021 budget proposal.
Thank you, Darrell. I can now bring before you the 2021 budget proposal that has undergone a process that has been greatly influenced and shaped by the new realities expressed in the COVID survey and the year-to-date results. The original 2021 budget proposal that was reviewed by the connectional table back in February set mission shares at $13.5 million. This level compared well to the 2019 actual mission share income of $13.7 million, and it was a 4% decline from this year's budget of $14.0 million. However, the CFA has put in place a spending plan in 2020 that is $12.4 million, and the forecast from the COVID survey is also $12.4 million. The CFA determined that the 2021 budget proposal should be recast with a lower collection rate. The collection rate for the first budget was set at 90.5%. This was influenced by the actual 2019 collection rate of 88.5%, as it was adjusted for the impact of the high number of church mergers and closures in 2019. The adjusted collection rate for last year was actually 90.0%. for the active churches at the end of 2019. In light of the financial impacts involved with the pandemic, the year-end forecast of the 2020 collection rate is in the range of 77% to 84%. The low 77% is based on the mid-year collection rate analysis. The 80% forecast is from the COVID survey, and 84% is anticipated to be a good stretch goal for the conference as we recover from the early year shortfalls. Looking at these forecasts for 2020, the CFA approved a recast to the 2021 budget proposal that will use 87.5% as the collection rate. The 87.5% collection rate reduces the 2021 mission share income from $13.5 million to $13 million for a year-over-year reduction of $1 million or 7.2%. The total expense reduction from the recast collection rate is $447,000. There are 3 budget items that were impacted by this reduction in expenses. First, we believe it is appropriate to institute a staff salary freeze in 2021 in light of the high levels of uncertainty that factor into the pandemic. The original budget proposed a staff increase of 1.5%, and the savings will be $77,000. The other expense reductions impact the strategic spending of the conference as we implement reductions in the accelerated debt payments and reduce the building reserve payment to 50%. Reducing the accelerated debt payments from $400,000 to $86,000 is a substantial decrease, but we believe the PPP funding from this year provides a path that still enables the last debt payment to be made in 2022. When we add the $477,000 of new budget reductions to the original budget, the 2021 budget provides an overall expense reduction of $1 million. The general church apportionments is based on the CFA petition that will be introduced at the General Conference next year. The petition will reduce BWC's share of the general church apportionment by 15.7% or $557,000. The proposed budget maintains the current staffing level at 63.5 full-time equivalents. This staffing level is 13% lower than 2012. There are also 3 changes of special interest within the conference. Boom funding is increased $19,000 to support the 5-year clergy care intensive for 80 clergy in 2021. The total cost of this program per year is $112,000. Initial funding of $6,000 has been allocated to launch a new clergy care initiative. New Faith Expressions will increase funding from closed church sales reserves from $200,000 to $250,000. The next 2 slides summarize the 2021 budget proposal. The budget assumptions that calculate the $1 million reduction of the mission shares is shown on this slide. The statistical data supported an apportionment-based decline of 3.2%. The benevolence factor is a slight reduction to 17.55%. And with the collection rate decrease of 87.5%, the overall reduction in the mission share income is 7.2%. A direct comparison of the 2021 budget proposal to the current 2020 budget completes our summary. Starting at the top, we see the mission shares income will be reduced by $1 million to $13,035,000. Other income will remain relatively flat at $4.7 million for a total income of $17.7 million. The expense within the regions will also remain relatively flat at $2.2 million. The large reduction in the general church apportionment results in a 5% reduction in the ministry teams to $8.8 million. But it is good to note that after this reduction, the ministry teams continue to be 50% of the overall budget expenses. The stewardship and Episcopal budgets are impacted by the reduction in the strategic spending for the accelerated debt and building reserves. These budgets are reduced 6% to $6.6 million. As in past years, we are asking for your approval of this budget with the understanding that the CFA has the practice of creating contingency plans that can account for 10%, 15%, and 25% reductions if needed. Shown on this slide is the contingency planning that outlined the actions of the 11.7% reductions that were approved by the CFA in June. At the time this contingency plan was approved, the year-end mission share forecasts were as high as $2.6 million shortfall. The available funds to cover that shortfall were identified as the $1.6 million expense reductions plus the $1.2 million of available PPP funds. The CFA believes the use of contingency planning is an essential tool for helping both the conference and local churches meet budget goals in difficult times. So now I bring before you the CFA recommendations for your consideration. We propose the 2021 budget be established at $17,700,253, with mission shares set at $13,034,887. This is a 7.2% reduction in mission shares from the 2020 budget. We propose the 2021 benevolence factor be set at 17.55%, which is a decrease from 17.6%. The proposed budget conforms to the Book of Discipline allocation of 33% for world service, with the remainder allocated to conference and general church benevolences. The CFA has contracted Ellen & Tucker to conduct the 2020 audit. In concurrence with the opinion of our auditors, we propose closing the 2020 books on January 12, 2021. As is our practice, we ask that you grant authority to CFA, in consultation with the bishop and the cabinet, to act on financial matters between sessions of the annual conference. Darrell and I thank you for your attention during this report of the 2021 budget proposal. We are grateful to serve the conference at this time. Thank you. Bishop, this completes our virtual report.